Hello and welcome to Idioms of Normality on Future Framed TV, hosted by Traces.Dreams. I am here today with someone very special and who works on some very interesting things. Would you like to introduce yourself?
So my name's Skye. I'm actually a food scientist and entomologist, which is a bug scientist. So that's a very strange combination of skills to start with. And in 2007, I founded Australia's first edible insect farm called the Edible Bug Shop.
Cool, that is really cool. So obviously what you're bringing to the table today is a background in food science, a background in bugs, and I already want to ask you and go off the script and ask you different questions, but I'm going to jump in with the first question. What is normal?
I'm going to go with normal around food because that's kind of my level of expertise. But definitely, I don't feel like everybody has the same sense of normal when it comes to food. How you grow up greatly influences how you portray food and what you feel is completely normal around food. For instance, if you grow up on a farm, then obviously you're going to feel that something normal is going out and growing your own food and going to the farm and getting that food, maybe going and bartering with your neighbors. If you live in the city, then going to a supermarket and buying your food is completely normal. If you're, like a family, maybe you eat meat and two veg is your normal meal. If you've got a vegetarian family, then maybe a lentil curry or a stir fry is more on your menu. So there's a really, really big difference between how people grow up and what they think is completely normal when it comes to food.
So normal is relative to your family circumstances, your cultural upbringing, the foods available to you, and what your parents bring you up on.
Exactly. And every single person has a completely different normal. And I don't feel like anything is right or wrong. I feel like whatever feels good to you, that's what normal should be.
So when you said that you're a food scientist and an entomologist, I was wondering which of those came first. Like,
Um,
were you studying entomology going, these look tasty?
No, well, it wasn't a planned thing. So ever since I was a little kid, I always have been really into bugs. Like I was that weird kid that had little jars with bugs on their desk at school. I was teaching all the other kids about bugs. Show and tell was like a praying mantis or something.
Oh,
So
wow.
I always knew I wanted to be an entomologist. So when I went to university, I studied entomology, but probably about half the year into my degree, I quickly realized that there's not a lot of jobs in entomology in Australia. So they actually asked me to be a forensic entomologist, which is a type of entomologist that would have a look at decomposing bodies and things like that and find out a death timeline based on the types of insects that are there and the level of decomposition, which is like kind of my jam a little bit, I have to say. But there's really, so if I did accept that job, it would kind of be like, that's my job for my whole life. That would be my whole life. And as like a 18-year-old, that was a little bit daunting. So there were actually, at the time when I was doing my entomology degree, there was a shortage of food scientists. And that kind of fits in really well with my personality. Most food scientists will know you have to have a particular kind of personality to be a food scientist, and that worked really well with me. So I actually did that at the same time as my entomology degree. So I would have a job to go to when I finished university.
A dual degree. And so,
Yes.
most people in food science are trying to get rid of the flies in their soup. And you've got a completely different direction.
Exactly. And when I was doing my degree, it never even crossed my mind that I would really be combining the two in my future career. I hadn't tried edible insects before, and it's not really something that had crossed my mind. So it was completely accidental, and now I'm the only entomologist / food scientist in the world as well, which is, a cool thing to have. But my first job out of university actually worked at a pet food factory developing different kinds of pet foods for like larger companies. So if your cat has like kidney disease or diabetes, they have like a special kind of food instead of medication to help them with the different kinds of issues that they have. And me and my husband went on a holiday to Cairns around that time when I started my job. And we went to this beautiful butterfly farm that was there. And everyone was just amazed by all these butterflies. So I turned to my husband and I said, you know what? When we get home, I'm going to make my own butterfly farm. And he kind of looked at me and was like, okay, darling, you do that. Go and make your butterfly farm. But that's what I did. I went and I made my own butterfly farm. And it just kind of grew from there. So then I was getting contacted by schools to ask, can you come and teach us about the life cycle of different kinds of bugs? And I had pets as bugs. I had tarantulas and scorpions and stick insects. So I was like, sure, I can come and teach kids about bugs. That's exactly what I would love to do that. So I started my own business just by breeding different kinds of bugs for education. But then we went on a holiday to Thailand, which is where it gets really interesting. So we traveled around and tried different kinds of edible insects. And when we got home, I was like, I really want some edible insects now. This is really fascinating. I really, really liked it, but you couldn't get them anywhere in Australia. So
What were you doing in Thailand? What?
we just went to Thailand for a holiday and we tried things like bamboo worms and crickets and grasshoppers and scorpions and all lots of different things like that. So it was really, really cool. Except they were like, the way that they were prepared was a little bit oily for my liking, like because a lot of them were stir fried in oil and lots of chili, and I'm not really a chili person. So I liked the whole concept of it more than the flavor. So when we came home, we were actually doing like a pet and animal expo where we were surrounded by cats and dogs. So I wanted like something that was a little bit gimmicky for people to come over and have a look at the bugs. So my little brother at the time was about 15, and I turned to him and I said, you know what, let's make some lollipops with real bugs on the inside. And being 15, my brother was like, yep, sure, let's do that. So we spent a week making 1,000 of these lollipops that had scorpions and ants and mealworms and crickets on the inside. And when we went to the expo, we actually sold out within a couple of hours of these lollipops. So we were just so happy that that had happened, but didn't really think anything of it. And then kind of the weeks after, I was getting calls from the newspaper, marketing companies, lolly shops saying, we saw your insect lollipops. Can we buy some? Or we want them for an event. And I'm like, oh, sure. Like, we can do that. That's fine. Call my brother. Come on, we need to make more lollipops. But being a food scientist, I'm like, okay, if it's going to be in a store, we actually have to have some nutritional labeling on the back of the pack to make sure that we're doing the right thing legally. So I sent away some crickets and some mealworms and some ants and a few other different kinds of insects for nutritional testing in a laboratory. And when I got the results back, I was like, oh my God, why does nobody eat this as food? Why does nobody eat this as food? It was just so nutrient dense. So I'm like, I have the perfect combination of skills to pull this off. I can convince people that eating bugs is a good idea. And that's what I've spent the past 13 years doing, is convincing people that eating insects is sustainable and healthy and delicious as well.
How's that going?
Really
Shifting
good.
people from what they consider for themselves a normal diet to what is, in Australia at least, considered not so normal diet.
Exactly. And when I was growing up, I didn't eat insects as a source of food, obviously, but it's normal for me now, and it's normal for my family and my children now, because I've had my business longer than I've had my children. So they don't think it's anything strange eating some mealworms after school or some cookies that are made with cricket powder.
Just to be clear, because I might be getting the wrong impression about you, Skye. When you say children, you're talking about human children, right?
Yes, human children. Yeah. I do have bug children as well, but we're talking about my human children.
I suspected you had bug children. Tell me a bit about your bug children.
Well, we still do educational shows where we go out to schools and we teach them all about the future of food and kind of what that looks like. And we have a program where we go into primary schools. So we take lots of different bugs with us. So we've got tarantulas, giant burrowing cockroaches, scorpions, different kinds of stick insects, giant millipedes and snails, any kind of really cool, like Australian native bug that we can take. Normally we'll take that and the kids absolutely love it.
Is there a difference between the way in which children are engaging with this as opposed to adults?
Yeah, so disgust is actually a learnt behavior. So if you don't like something, that's normally because your parents didn't like it or you've seen someone not like it before. When we go into schools, we actually teach children that there's lots of different kinds of foods that they're going to be growing up with, including edible insects and algae and laboratory grown meats. We teach them about regenerative agriculture as well. And we've been running that program for about 12 years now. And it was actually probably about this time last year, I was in the supermarket with my children, and they're all really small. So they're all in the trolley at the same time. And this man came up and tapped me on the shoulder. And I kind of looked at him and I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing? He goes, are you the bug lady? And I'm like, yes. And then he said, oh, you know what? When I was in year 5, you came to my school and you taught me all about edible insects. And I actually include them in my diet because that's something that's really stuck with me the whole time.
Wow.
And I was just so happy
Yeah.
because you don't
Has that
see
impact on
what
someone?
happens
Yeah.
afterwards. Yeah. And in September, we actually just saw our 1 millionth student in our Future Foods program. So
1
that
million.
means 1 million Australian children and adults now actually have learnt about edible insects and the future of food. And even if just a small proportion of those little children grow up having a more sustainable outlook on their food and what kind of where it comes from and making smarter food choices, then it's totally worthwhile for us.
A million Australian school children. That's
Yes, a
like
million.
what are we up to? 1/25 of the Australian population.
Yeah, yep.
That's huge.
It is. It is huge. And it's a long-term project, obviously, because we've been doing it for 12 years now. And the program has changed over time to include new kinds of foods that are coming out, and especially like cellular agriculture and things like that
What
that are
kind of
happening right
agriculture?
now. Our cellular agriculture. So that's where they grow the meat in a laboratory using a bioreactor. So not actually grown on a farm. So they take the stem cells from different kinds of animals and then they will grow it. So there's no need for commercial farming, really.
Is that hitting the market yet though? Cellular farming?
Not yet. It's a little bit expensive, but kind of within the next five years, you'll probably be seeing those kinds of things on the supermarket shelves. That area is
Mm.
receiving a lot of funding at the moment, and there's a lot of people, a lot of really, really smart people working on it. So it's something you'll be seeing very, very soon.
So the vision for the future is test tube meat for your insect protein.
Well, we kind of prefer insect protein just because it's a little bit more natural. So we were actually, in the past, we were hunter gatherers, right? So we would gather things and forage for things like insects. We've actually got enzymes in our guts that are there to digest the types of proteins that are in insects. So it's actually a much more digestible form of protein. And it's not just the protein when we're talking about insects as well. There's heaps of B12 vitamins, you've got calcium, iron, potassium, magnesium, and zinc in there. You've got 3 times the amount of omega-3 as salmon. You've got a complete amino acid profile as well. So it's kind of like a little superfood. So how we kind of introduce it to people isn't by giving them like a huge tarantula and saying, here you go, let's go eat a bug. That's not how we do it. So we take familiar foods that people would eat every day and we enrich them using the types of proteins that are found in insects. So instead of having, like one of those corn chips that you can get in the supermarket that's got lots of letters and numbers on the back, we make a corn chip that has 4 ingredients in it and it's got more protein than an egg in the packet of corn chips. It's got half of your B12s. It's got a third of your iron in a packet of corn chips.
Wow.
You can get pasta that does the same thing. So it's got 4 times as much calcium as milk in the pasta. And it's something that you can just switch out for your regular diet. Instead of having your white pasta, switch it for a cricket pasta. And it's a familiar food that you already know how to make, but it's just a better for you ingredient.
So what I hear here is you're not throwing insects at people and just hoping that people eat the insects. You're taking something familiar and just working within a proximal zone of
Yeah.
changing the familiar.
Yeah, exactly. Just making it a little bit better for you with something that you already know how to do.
Yeah.
So one of the favorite things that my kids love to eat is chocolate chip cookies, which I know a lot of kids love to eat chocolate chip cookies, right?
Well,
But I
mine-
just make them. My 6-year-old is very, very fussy eater. He needs to have like crunchy food. His food can't touch. Like he doesn't like sauce, things like that, right? So I'll make him chocolate chip cookies, but I replace a third of the regular flour with the cricket protein powder. So that means each one of those cookies is the same as he has the same amount of protein as 2 eggs for him. And he doesn't he doesn't really eat meat, so he doesn't get protein from other places. It gives him all his B12 for the day as well. And he thinks he's getting a treat. So it's like, when your mum used to grate the carrot into your spag bowl. It's a little bit like that, but did the next step up.
So there's a few things about this that I find interesting. One is I think your kids might be a bit more open to this than or accustomed, I should say, not even open to it. I'm guessing that you've been doing this for longer than you've had kids. And this might be appealing to other parents who may or may not want to tell their children what they're eating, but want to get those nutrients into their child.
Yeah, but I think kids don't really care that much about the crickets in their food. They actually think it's kind of cool. So when my kids' friends come here, that's what they ask for. They want to try the things with the crickets in it. They want to try the mealworms, and that because they don't get that at home. So they want to come here and try all those different things, which is really awesome. My 2 little boys, when they were going to preschool, they actually were having like this little whisper between themselves where they're going, "You ask mum, you ask." And I'm like, "What are you guys talking about?" And then he was 4 at the time. My 4-year-old comes over and goes, "Mum, can we take some spicy cricket chips to school tomorrow?" And then I said, "Yeah, I think that's okay." And then he goes back to the one, "Yes, Mum said we can take spicy cricket chips to school because they got a little bit of chili in them, so they think it's really spicy." And I'm thinking, "Oh, you little buggers, you're trying to get like your teacher to eat the cricket chips," not knowing they're going, "Oh, we're going to get one of the teachers to try these cricket chips." I'm going, "You can't." And I go up and I said, "You can't trick people into eating it. You have to tell them what's in it." And they go, "Are you sure we're allowed to take the chips because they've got chili in them? Are we allowed to take chili to school?" So the novel part to them wasn't the fact that it had crickets in it. They were trying to get the teacher to try the chili in the chips.
I see what you're saying. So you're thinking, they're trying to get people into eating crickets, but they're thinking, let's trick people into eating chili.
Chili, yes. Which I thought was hilarious.
Yeah.
And and then
it's not a question of what's normal. It's a question like, what is the abnormal thing there? And the abnormal thing is chili, not the
chili. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
What insects are you putting into food?
So the main ones that we do are crickets and mealworms, but we supply a lot of restaurants around Australia. So we do different kinds of insects depending on what the chefs really want. We really focus on the crickets quite a lot because they're really nutrient dense. They've got a low flavor, a low color, and a low texture. So we can hide them in foods really, really easily. I feel like that if they had a flavor, it doesn't matter what flavor it is, like it can be the best flavor in the world. Because it's insects, people would automatically think that that's a negative flavor. They can taste the insects, but because they've got hardly any flavor to them, they're kind of like tofu. They absorb the flavors that are around them. So it means that they're really, really easy to add into things that we eat all the time.
So it sounds like mealworms and crickets are a staple diet insect. What's a specialty insect?
So more things that we farm in smaller numbers. So things like ants will farm for a lot of the high-end restaurants, giant water bugs or grasshoppers, different kinds of moths and beetles as well, just depending on what the chef kind of has in their mind.
Water bugs what's a water bug?
It kind of looks a little bit like a scorpion that lives in the water.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So Google it, it'll come up with some pictures. It does look a little bit scary, but when you go into a restaurant, you want to be challenged with your food choices. You don't want something that you can make at home. So definitely a giant water bug on top of your fried rice or something like that is definitely a food challenge.
Oh, I'm up for the challenge. Now I've got a bit of a confession. My children have got insects as pets, and when I've sort of introduced the idea of eating insects, my son, who's a little bit younger, it has been fine with it. He's tried mealworms, he's tried crickets, and but my daughter thinks I'm being rude for offering to eat the pets.
Oh.
It's funny, isn't it? Like the idea of eating your pets, because in some countries that is an offensive idea to us, but you know, in some South American countries they eat guinea pig, in some countries they eat dog, and you know, it's a food source at the end of the
Yeah,
day.
exactly.
Food source. But for some people it's a pet, for some people it's a food source, for some people it's both.
Yeah, well, definitely. I think that it kind of depends on your mindset as well. I feel like a lot of people, especially people that live in the city, they're really far removed from where their food comes from.
Mm.
I saw a news article the other day that someone was really upset that their roast chicken from the supermarket still had feet attached to it. Like it wasn't supposed to come from a real animal. And I didn't really understand that. Why are you upset? Don't you realize that that actually comes from an animal? Who cares if it's got the feet still on it?
And I guess you're really interested in that human reaction to what people are purchasing to put on their plate, because as someone who's trying to shift, let's just say the Australian diet, I guess you're interested in the human reaction to a normal diet or an unfamiliar diet or what's an exciting diet.
Yeah, exactly. And we go to a lot of events and we speak to a lot of people about kind of their diets. And we've seen a huge shift in focus over the last like 12 or 13 years. So when we first started doing edible insects, if we went to an event, there would be like a big giant force field around us where people couldn't come within like 5 meters because they were afraid that we were going to like throw insects on them or something like that. I don't know what they were afraid of anyway. But now we've got to the stage where people are really focused on their health. They're focused on sustainable foods, environmentally friendly foods, and insects really ticks all the boxes for a lot of people. So last year, we were fortunate enough to be invited to do cooking demonstrations on the Women's Weekly stage at the Royal Easter Show. So we actually saw thousands and thousands of people every day that were all so interested in edible insects, and people were coming just to learn about it and just to try the samples, which was a fantastic thing to see. It made me so happy.
So break down this demography for me a bit, because I really want to know who are the early adopters, who are the people who are ready to step outside of their box, who are the people who are testing this food, you know, willing to take the next step, and who are the people who are not just willing to take the next step, but really jumping on board with the insect food project.
Yeah. I feel like it's the kind of the early adopters when we first started farming insects on a commercial scale. We're definitely people that were really focused on health and nutrition. So a lot of people that are like bodybuilders that are going to the gym and really can identify the value in a natural product that has digestible protein plus all the micronutrients and B12s and the amino acids and all that kind of stuff. Those people were kind of the early adopters. Now we have majority of our customers are actually families, people that want to eat less meat. Have more of a flexitarian diet, so they're not necessarily vegetarian, but they want to decrease the amount of meat that they're using.
Called a flexitarian.
A flexitarian, yeah. So
I like
flexitarian, it's like a flexible diet. So you want to eat less meat, you want to have a more sustainable kind of diet. And edible insects kind of fit straight in there because they're a sustainable protein alternative. And especially if you've got young kids, you can't feed them on just a vegetarian diet. They need to have the B12s and the amino acids. And insects are kind of a sustainable and ethical choice.
What makes them a sustainable, ethical choice?
Yeah, so we actually take fruit and vegetable waste from food production processing and we use that to feed the insects. So that means that we only use a tiny little amount of water in their production. So if you replace just one meat-based meal a week with a meal that uses insects as your source of protein instead, you actually save over 100,000 litres of drinking water a year, and that's each person.
Hang on. Let's say that really slowly, because that's really interesting. So you're saying we can reduce water consumption.
Yes.
By just replacing one meat meal a week.
Yes.
With a cricket meal.
Yes, that's right. And that's super easy to do, right? Instead of making like a curry or a stir fry that uses meat as your source of protein, just put extra vegetables in there and add a cricket protein powder at the last minute. And you've got the same thing you normally eat. It'll still fill you up. People always ask me, how much do you have to eat? But because it's so high in protein, you don't need to eat a lot. If you've got a tablespoon, which is about 20 grams, that's got about 40% of your calcium for the day. You've got 30% of your iron in there, nearly half of your B12s as well, about 30% of your omega-3s. You've got 100% of your zinc and manganese and phosphorus in there. So a tablespoon isn't really hard to do. You could sprinkle that on your cereal in the morning and off you go.
I feel like we need a rolling screen. It's just saying all these facts and figures.
All the things, yeah.
Yeah, all the ingredients in all of the nutrients.
All the good things, yeah.
Well, we can read
A
this
little
on the back
pop-up, you can go like that and just,
yeah. We can read this on the back of the packets that you're selling.
Yeah, definitely. If you do a little bit of research, there's a lot of information now available about the nutrients that are found in crickets and different kinds of insects. Insects don't create a lot of greenhouse gases. They create about 1/100th of the amount of greenhouse gases as traditional forms of protein farming as well. And we don't use arable land, so that's land that can be used for grain or vegetables. We actually farm them in unused warehouses in urban environments. So that leaves all that space. And we farm them in kind of apartment blocks. So we stack them on top of each other. So we get a lot more protein per square metre than other sources of protein.
Fascinating. So you're not on a farm, you're in a warehouse.
Yeah, so we farm them in a warehouse.
Which uses less space, and of course you're stacking them, so it's
Exactly.
using less geometric space.
Yeah. And we control their temperature on the inside. So it's like going to Bali in the middle of summer. It's very hot and it's very humid, but we run on solar energy. So we're not creating all these greenhouse gases. We're using the sun to create a really fantastic environment that the crickets like.
Wow. I could keep going with question after question because I'm so fascinated by this. I mean, I guess, is the urban warehouse environment specific because what would happen if you were in a rural setting? Would people get uncomfortable about, the bug lady growing crickets right next to their wheat farm? Or
I don't think so, because we have seen a lot of farmers, like when we went to the Easter show last year, that was a really fantastic opportunity for us. And a lot of these farmers are looking for ways to diversify their farm in the off season for their particular crops. So they're actually looking at farming things like edible insects in their sorting barns and their sorting warehouses and things like that. So it's actually fantastic that farmers are looking at things like this to diversify their crops.
Wow, very interesting. In the next 5-10 years, and here you've got 1 million school children that you've educated over the last dozen or so years. You've got an expanding market for these bugs. What questions do you think we need to ask in order to expand the repertoire of what people might consider normal in their diet every day?
I think that food is a lot about emotion. So you have an emotional connection with food, and a lot of people don't actually have that connection with edible insects, obviously. But with your, like your mum's Sunday roast or your nonna's pasta or whatever it might be, you do have that emotional connection. So food manufacturers really try to give you an emotional connection with any kind of new food ingredient, and that comes through education. So we use the media and our school programs and social media to kind of help educate people about why it's important to them. So it's important to you because if we don't kind of secure our food future right now with looking at different kinds of foods and new kinds of crops, then your children basically won't have enough to live on. Yeah. You won't have an environment for them to live in. Your grandchildren won't be here because you won't have enough food to feed them. Yeah. So by us kind of making little tiny changes now, it doesn't have to be big changes. So for instance, changing one of your meat-based meal a week with a meal of edible insects. Instead of picking up Doritos, maybe pick up cricket corn chips instead. Just by doing those little things, it adds up to a really, really big difference. We don't need everybody living perfectly sustainable all the time. We need everybody living imperfectly sustainable some of the time to add up to a big difference.
Thank you so much for that very erudite answer. And it was a question that was grounded in very practical matters, but on a conceptual level, I was listening to that and hearing what are the emotions that we attach to what we consider is normal. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really, on a conceptual level, a very important question to ask, no matter the topic, whether that's the diet we consider as a normal diet, what emotions do we attach to that? And what emotions should we attach to a wider sense of thinking about what we're eating every day?
Yeah.
a wider sense of the normal. And here you're talking about sustainable future. You're talking about how imperfect humans are, and it's okay to be imperfect. But let's be imperfect in ways that is a bit more sustainable than what we're currently doing. Skye, thank you so much for your time. Now, if people Google you, are we Googling butterfly Skye? Are we Googling bug lady? What are we Googling?
You can probably Google anything and it will come up with something. But if you Google the edible bug shop, normally that'll come up with lots of information about edible bugs and some facts and figures about why they're sustainable and all that nutritional information as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a really enlightening conversation. And thank you to the people at home who have joined us to learn a bit about what is normal when it comes to diets.